when the Queen was at a garden party or a big event, if she moved her handbag from that side to that side, that was a cue to the aide to come over and go, "Oh, madam, we need to move you on to that." It was her way to escape from the person that she was talking to.
That's so interesting. The other thing I heard, Tom, was that if she took the handbag and put it on the table in front of her, that meant meeting over. Get me out of here, guys.
Welcome, Royalists. I am so excited to be here. We've got another fabulous episode of the Royalist podcast for you today. We'll be talking about Harry and Meghan's tour down under and how it's already going disastrously wrong. We'll be hearing from a great friend of the Queen who'll be telling us all about what she really thought about Brexit. And if you've ever wondered what were Queen Elizabeth II's greatest looks, well, Plum Sykes is here to tell us all about it. For those of you who don't know me, hello, I'm Tom Sykes. This is the Royalist podcast, your weekly destination for scoops and scandals that the British legacy media just can't talk about. I've reported on the royal family for decades, but in 2025, I was kicked out of the so-called Royal Rota, which is the kind of press pool of approved journalists to cover the royal family, by the King's chief press officer himself, who objected to a story that I had written saying that King Charles was suffering from incurable cancer. Well, that was the truth, and I stood by it. They clearly thought they were going to be able to end my career. Well, I've got a surprise for them. The Royalist has just gone from strength to strength ever since then with all of you guys' fantastic support. I'm so grateful to have you here. You can catch up with me on Substack, on YouTube, and now on this fabulous new podcast. So without further ado, let's get into today's Royal Rundown. First, it's Tea with Tom, and I'll be catching up with my old pal, Paula Froelich, who'll be telling me everything that's already going wrong with Harry and Meghan's tour of Australia, which is getting underway just about now. Then it's time for our Royal Insider. And this week we are honoured to have a very dear friend of the Queen, Hugo Vickers, who'll be telling us about what really stressed Queen Elizabeth II out about Brexit. And finally, it's Royal Fashion with Plum Sykes. Plum will be taking us on a deep dive through 100 years of Queen Elizabeth's clothing on the 100th anniversary of the Queen's birth. You won't want to miss it. So let's not waste any time. Let's get into our first segment, Tea with Tom. Yes, everybody. So now it is time for one of my favorite segments, Tea with Tom with Paula Froelich. And as always, Paula Froelich is bringing the piping hot tea. Paula, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm better now that I'm with you, Tom. I mean, you make every day better for me. You're like my brother from another mother. Thank you.
You are most welcome. Somebody who's not having a great week is Prince Harry, who is going to be giving a lecture on kind of issues related about workplace bullying while being sued for being a workplace bully. Tell us all about it, Paula. What's happened?
Well, the irony is rich here. I mean, it was already rich because he, on Wednesday, is going to Melbourne for the InterEdge Psychosocial Summit, where he will give the keynote speech for a whopping 50 grand about mental health in the workplace, which is, number one, hilarious because, as we've discussed before, he's never held a job. Number two, his wife, Meghan Markle, has been accused by many people of being a workplace bully, and now he himself is being accused by his former charity, Bali, of basically bullying. So it was shocking. Friday, the lawsuit went down. It's shocking in many ways because, for once, Harry is the defendant in a lawsuit. The litigious prince likes to go after people, but has never really had people come after him.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you? So just to be clear, as I understand it, it is Bali which is suing Harry. But I think there's very little doubt in most people's minds that the animating force behind this is Sophie Chandauka, with whom he had a spectacular falling out, as detailed in Tom Bower's book, Betrayal. And it would appear that Sophie has been saving this up for some time, because in that book, there is mention of her being particularly annoyed about stories going out saying that she'd crashed the charity, that, Harry's side were briefing that she'd crashed the charity that was going to be bust within 6 months, etc. None of which has turned out to be true, of course.
Yeah, and they also put out there that she had wasted money, and that was, not being a spendthrift and wasting things on like brand consultants who did a deep dive into the Sentabali brand and indeed found out that people were not happy with Sentabali because it was too closely tied to Harry's personal brand, which was tarnished. They also found out that people didn't want to be associated with Meghan Markle at all. And so, of course, Harry thought, well, she's wasting money. Our brand is just fine, darn it. And, it turns out that she wasn't wasting money. She actually had a plan, and she wanted Harry to come alone to actually visit Lesotho again because he had not been in 4 years, kind of bring things back to Africa.
And the couple, of course, are touching down in Australia, events taking place all this week. The tour has been mired in controversy, hasn't it, Paula? But it also doesn't seem to have been a wild commercial success. It might be fair to say. I mean, the tickets for Her Best Life, although they say they're sold out, actually, we both know that actually, if you put yourself on the wait list, mysteriously, a offer to purchase a ticket arrives. In fact, not just an offer, you get quite a lot of hassle to actually buy a ticket. Sources have been telling us, haven't they?
Well, here's the deal, Tom. This whole thing is a disaster. It is an S storm in the making. And, local TV is calling this, they're saying that Harry and Meghan are trying to treat Australians like an ATM. And this is what the local national television shows are saying. When I say local, I mean Australian. But it's a problem. They have a very bad image problem. They're going down. They arrive tomorrow. Wednesday and Thursday, they'll be in Melbourne for Harry's big speech to people about mental health in the workplace, which we've discussed is a farce, for Harry at least. And then he'll meet with Invictus because he has promised that the 2031 Invictus Games will be coming to Australia, which of course means massive money in his pocket. And then he's going to Canberra, the seat of the government, likely, I'm told, to pay respects to the wounded and the war memorials, and then they will head to Sydney. And Sydney, they will stay in a lovely 5-star hotel. They will not be staying at the Intercontinental Coogee Beach. And also, as you and I have discussed, named Poogie Beach due to the sewage smell and the fecal balls that often wash up. And that event is beyond problematic. Not only is it being co-hosted by a woman who owes $550,000 to the Australian Tax Authority, but nobody really wants to go. There's been an influencer blackout. And by that, I mean anyone who is anyone in Australia in that wellness space is not posting. They're not interested, and they don't want their own personal brands associated with the Sussexes, which is a problem. The other big thing is that while those two are in Australia, Pamela Anderson is also going to be in Australia. Now, she'll be in Melbourne when they're in Sydney, and Sydney while they're in Melbourne. But Pamela has sold out arenas that can hold thousands of people. So it's very difficult. I think a lot of people have told me that Pamela Anderson is actually seen as authentic. And she is actually seen as someone people want to learn from, whereas Meghan, unfortunately, is not.
It's a really interesting parallel, isn't it? And it's interesting that they're both there in this similar time frame, because, of course, Pamela went through that terrible experience with the Pam and Tommy tapes that then became the Netflix film. And I think, was such she was such a sort of victim of sort of sexist, the first wave really of sort of sexist internet exploitation culture, was really a laughing stock. People treated the whole thing as a joke. This tape was passed around and subsequently kind of emerged with fantastic kind of dignity, has a really big Substack, has a really big social media following. as he says, just incredibly authentic. And yet here we have Meghan struggling to sell 300 tickets because
Mm.
ultimately I think she's just perceived as being tacky, inauthentic, and just fake and just really after your money.
Well, and it's also interesting too because Pamela also sells products. She sells skincare products, Sansi brand. She just came out with a line of home goods. So she also is selling things, but she's just considered likable. And something that she's someone who people want to learn from and say, wow, you went through actual hell for decades, not just 1 year. It's not just the movie. It is domestic abuse. It was being treated as a joke. It was everything for decades, and she's come out the other end stronger than ever. Whereas Meghan, she's she claims to have been treated badly. People don't necessarily believe it because what they saw with their own eyes. But her only thing is a grievance against the royal family. And you're talking about a country, Australia, that is quite loyal to the royal family.
It's such an interesting point because if you read a lot of stuff about Meghan and you're sort of familiar with her early history, it's very clear that Meghan has kind of tweaked her personal narrative to make it sound like her early years were much tougher than they were. Like, for example, this whole thing of like, I was a latchkey kid, I had to eat Jack in the Box, the only food I ever saw was on telly, conflicts very notably with her father's account of things. He's always said, she never was forced to have a weekend job. She was always studying. She was at a private school. She ate at excellent, I would make a point of taking her to excellent restaurants. After school, she would be on the set at General Hospital, which I was working on, and paints a picture of her having had a actually very privileged childhood, which he worked very hard to provide for her. But I suppose she's felt it necessary to rewrite her story to make it appear that she came from much scrappier, tougher beginning than she really did.
Well, she has a habit of that, and she is also uh, kind of recanted what she said in the past. In the past, she said we always ate well. She actually echoed what Thomas Markle has said, and then she came out with this new narrative. Now, I think she likes to do that a lot. It's the same thing with the palace and marrying into. It's the same thing with saying, I didn't even know who Harry was. I had no idea. And you're like, girl, please. So I think what she's trying to do is rewrite the narrative to make herself seem like the plucky young girl who just somehow made it through to become a real life Cinderella, and everyone's just kind of like, girl, please, it's okay if you were just you and said, yeah, my parents were divorced, but I had a nice upbringing and I did work hard and I worked hard through college and then I worked hard in Hollywood. It was a pain in the butt, but I did it. And then someone set me up with a prince and it worked out. That would be an authentic line. Unfortunately, she isn't going through with the storyline of what actually happened.
And of course, that authenticity crisis is something that we've talked about so much before, whether it's lifting the jam out of the jam pot with the tongs the wrong way round, or whether it's, making a fruit rainbow out of 50 different bits of colored of fruit that would probably cost $300, or whatever it may be. There always seems to be this huge gap between what Meghan wants to present to us for public consumption and what the reality of her life and her beliefs and her value system actually is. And I think that's this whole Australian trip. That is the problem in microcosm, because it's quite clear that she's not going there because she wants to be part of a besties girl weekend. She's going there for the money, right?
Yep. Again, it's as the Australian morning shows are saying, she thinks she can use us as an ATM. And no offense, if you've lost the morning shows, which are really fluffy, nice, you don't have much of a chance. But she's also, the people are being very cynical because the person who set up this trip is Soho House's global director of membership, Marcus Anderson. And of course, Soho House is opening Soho House Sydney. So we see there's all this other stuff. And then, of course, she's saying, we're doing charity. And in the leaked notes, it's like, we're going to go visit children's hospitals. But the problem again, Tom, is they seem to do everything for a photo op. There isn't something that they do at home in Montecito, in Santa Barbara, on the regular basis that really fills their lives or gives backing to them saying, show up and do good. Because they apparently only show up and do good for about an hour when the cameras are clicking.
Yeah, and you do hear that a lot actually from people, and I know people in Montecito who live around there, and they are apparently really very negligible involvement at all in any of the kind of local charities in that part of the world. And of course, we think of Montecito as being this kind of massively wealthy enclave, but it's close to, as you've said, Paul, it's close to some very poor areas that have significant charitable impetuses and significant charitable initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but there's a volunteer firefighter group there because, of course, they live in a massive wildfire area. And Harry does nothing. Meghan doesn't do anything. And, everyone just kind of looks at them and says, okay, so you can go 10,000 miles away and shake a sick child's hand, but you can't do anything at home.
What really strikes me about this tour, Paula, is that it feels like it's got disaster written all over it because it feels like it's just much like the tour to Jordan. It feels like on the ground, it's going to be unbelievably chaotic. No one's going to know where they're going. It was all put together apparently by a text message from Marcus Anderson in Meghan's kitchen. I mean, the whole narrative story of it is so incredibly random. They're going to turn up. It's going to be chaos. No one's going to know where they're going. No one's going to vote the right cars, the right taxis. Everybody's going to be getting lost, wondering what they're meant to be doing next. And of course, the point is that to organize a foreign tour to another country is really difficult. And when the royals do it, they have a full-time staff of at least 2 people back in the old days, so maybe more now, working on it full-time. They have this gigantic network of loyalists on the ground who do all this work for free, who do all the due diligence, who give you all the intel, who help you organize with everything, who are semi sort of government employees. So there's just a huge amount of organization that goes into it. And it just makes me think, if what you want to do is go to Australia and visit charities, why did you leave the royal family?
Yeah, exactly. But also, Tom, every quasi-royal tour that they have done, someone has not done their homework. So in Nigeria, they took a plane ride and posed with a man who's wanted in the United States for embezzlement. In Colombia, they went at the behest of a politician who has had some allegations against her. Now they're going to Australia, and you're just kind of going, huh, the major sponsor of Harry's speech or the conference he's going to has just paid out a wheelchair discrimination lawsuit. And of course, Harry works with a lot of people at Invictus who are unfortunately actually in wheelchairs. And Meghan also had no idea that Gemma O, who was co-hosting this conference, had tax problems.
And Paula, if they go to Australia and it's all a magnificent success and it all runs like clockwork, we will have to turn up here next week with edible hats because we will both be required to eat them.
I will not. I will let you do yours, but I will not because I already think it's just tacky AF. And the fact that Harry's hanging out with the guys sponsoring his big thing and basically paying him who had to settle a wheelchair lawsuit, and Meghan hanging out with a woman who owes $550,000 to the tax man. I mean, where's all that money going from that event? Some of it's going right in Meghan's pocket. So no, I think it's a disaster either way. I think it's just ridiculous. But I'll bring your hat for you.
Yes, bring me an edible hat. I'll eat mine. Paula, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to catch more of Paula, you know where to find her. The Inside Scoop with Paula Froelich on YouTube and Substack. That's where you can get all the Paula you can handle. Thanks very much, Paula, for being with us.
Thank you, my friend. See you soon.
Now it's time for our Royal Insider interview. And I was very fortunate to be joined earlier in the week by Hugo Vickers. I am excited to say that continuing the Royalists' run of fantastic interviews, today we have none other than the legendary royal biographer Hugo Vickers joining with me. Hugo is the author of a ridiculously unputdownable personal history of Queen Elizabeth, and in fact it is called Queen Elizabeth II, A Personal History. Hugo, can I start by asking you, how did you get to know the Queen? Because this is, as the title says, a personal history. And in answer to that great question, what was she really like?
Well, the answer to the question, how did I get to know her? I mean, did any of us really know her? And obviously it was gradual, because I met her when I was 16 in 1968. And then I met her actually about 40 times, I think, through until 2022. And of course, sometimes it was just a formal meeting, and sometimes there was the opportunity to chat about some really interesting things. One of my favorite stories is not my story, it's Dick Griffin, her PPO, when they're walking at Balmoral, and some Americans come along and ask, do you live up here? And she says, well, I have a holiday home. And then they say, how long have you been coming here? Well, 80 years. Oh, you must have met the Queen. And she said, I haven't, but he has, pointing at the detective. And they then ask, they want a photograph with him. And then he says, why don't you, have a photograph with my friend? And so they take a picture with the Queen, and off they go. And she just said, I just long to be a fly on the wall when they show the pictures back in California. That sort of thing. I think she enjoyed that a lot. But she was, yeah, she did. She was very generous, I think, in the way she said things. In one time in Malta, I did things with Commonwealth Walkways, and the foreign minister tried to introduce me to the Queen, and she just said, oh, he turns up all over the place. That's very generous. And funny.
Why do you think we miss her so much?
Oh, well, that's very easy to answer, because her reign was surely one of the most glorious reigns in the history of our country. 70 years, none of us have known anything else except that. And I cannot think of a reign in history in which I would have preferred to live under any political or economic circumstances. She sort of had a sort of pervasive atmosphere of calm over everything. You felt that while the Queen was there, nothing could really go too wrong. Her sort of unchanging qualities, her stability, and all those things. And when she left, I think many, many people have said it, you felt rather sort of cast adrift. I think the King did a very good job in holding it all together, but nevertheless, there is that feeling.
You have a wonderful anecdote in your book about the Queen's reaction to the meeting. Obviously very controversial at the time, and indeed controversial today, the meeting with Idi Amin. And it got me thinking, if you wouldn't mind telling us a bit about the story and the context of that story, and what reflections that gives you to think about these calls for King Charles III not to go ahead with this state visit, which is taking place in a couple of weeks. Literally, the head of the Liberal Democrats might be saying, well, you shouldn't do it. I mean, it seems ridiculous to me, but I'd love to know your thoughts, especially in the context of how the Queen had that very astute and acute awareness of her soft power and the way she could use that soft power for good.
Yes, well, several interesting points there. I mean, Idi Amin went to lunch with the Queen. The Queen, was once one of the private secretaries said, we really don't think you ought to meet this character. Not Amin on this occasion, but she said, well, I meet mass murderers every day of my life. I don't see why not. So she was used to that. And when Amin invited her to come out to celebrate the 10th anniversary of independence in Uganda, clearly she wasn't going to go, but she asked Alec Douglas Hume for formal advice as Foreign Secretary. And the Foreign Office picked away at the message which would be sent. And the first message said, I send to you and the people of Uganda my great best wishes on this auspicious occasion. And that got changed very subtly to, I send through you to the people of Uganda my best wishes, etc., etc. And of course, the other funny story about Amin was this terrible fear that he was going to turn up at the Silver Jubilee. And the Queen was at St. Paul's Cathedral, and Mountbatten asked her afterwards, what would you have done? And she just joked that I'd have picked up the Lord Mayor's sword and whacked him over the head. Of course, she wouldn't have done. But so just before I answer the thing about Trump, I could just say to you that I went to Russia when the Queen was on her 1994 state visit, and I was in the Kremlin in St. George's Hall, and I saw the very formal meeting between the Queen's suites and President Yeltsin's suites, and the national anthems were played. It was all very formal. That was, I think, on Tuesday evening. By Thursday evening, he was wrapped around her little finger to the point that he actually put on a special march past on the quayside at St. Petersburg before she got into Britannia and sailed away. And in a way, looking at Yeltsin, you thought he'd just made a new friend that actually he was never going to see again. That was absolutely fascinating. So, yes, I agree with you. The king should definitely go to Washington because apart from perhaps Prince William, the king is the only person that President Trump respects in this country. He certainly doesn't respect the prime minister. And so he can pour oil on troubled waters and, he can do a lot of good. You use the word soft power. Exactly. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I know there's a lot of controversy, a lot of people jumping on the thing saying that he shouldn't go for this reason, for that. The reasons are perfectly understandable, but I think he should definitely go because it could do a lot of good.
Yeah, I mean, it's his job, isn't it?
Of course, yeah. And if the government tells him to go, he'll go, assuming that he's well enough, of course. His health is always a concern, for it's a long way. I know he was very tired after that 2-day trip, I think, that he made to Canada last year. They both came back exhausted. So, it takes a lot out of him.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about the book is when you quote from your diaries, and it's because it's nice to see how you were thinking about it contemporaneously at the time. One of the moments where you quote from the diary is when you're talking about Meghan and Harry's wedding, and you express it would be fair to say a little bit of skepticism as they are walking down the aisle. Was the collapse of the relationship with Harry and the royal family a source of great sadness to the Queen?
I think it was a source of great stress to the Queen. I think because, you must remember that, her father took over when her uncle abdicated, and he basically chucked his duty aside to take what he thought was the path of happiness with Mrs. Simpson. I saw him once, and I'd never seen a man with sadder eyes, whereas the Queen's eyes were sparkling because she'd done her duty all her life. So I think to see Prince Harry sort of heading off into the unknown was very depressing because he was doing a really good job. I live in a certain amount of chaos, and I found a copy of Hello magazine lying on the floor, and there was a picture of Prince Harry grinning from ear to ear, and I thought, goodness me, this is what's going on? And then I looked, 2015, pre-Meghan, so he looks miserable now. And the Queen did say at one point to a friend of hers, all he does is he's just given it all up to be a childminder for Archie. I would put it differently and have done so, I'm afraid, slightly unkindly on one occasion, said, you really cannot be Captain General of the Royal Marines if you're lying barefoot under a tree in California. Remember that picture?
I do. Was it particularly painful for the Queen because it stirred memories of the abdication?
Well, if it didn't actually stir memories of the abdication, that was probably always in her psyche. You do your bit, you get on with it. And, he was doing a good job. And I mean, it looked as though she was going to do a good job too, because she'd been doing things in the Commonwealth countries like a lot of actresses do beforehand. I thought, this is great. Here they are committed to the Commonwealth. And the Queen gave them the whole of the Commonwealth to explore and develop. William and Catherine were going to be doing home things, and they were given the Commonwealth. Evidently not enough for that particular lady, but I think she probably always had a little plan. And the only thing which surprised me, because I never thought that she would stay forever, was that she did it in the Queen's reign, in the Queen's lifetime, because I thought that was not going to happen. But, she's has a habit of dumping people, so she dumped her father, her first husband, her Canadian chef lover, Jessica Mulroney, the whole British royal family. Well, you wonder who she's going to dump next.
And you say, obviously, you write about the Queen being upset about the timing of some of their media appearances when the Duke of Edinburgh was unwell. And you say also you have a very tender depiction of the Duke of Edinburgh's final hours on the earth. He poured himself a beer, had a bath, and then slipped away. And the Queen, it was that magnificent, dry humour that you say, was very angry at him for not saying goodbye.
Well, yes. I mean, what was interesting was that the media had sort of at least 3 of the entrances to Windsor Castle monitored 24 hours a day in case the Duke came home from hospital or the Queen came out for some reason. Well, I can think of at least 5 entrances to Windsor Castle, and of course, surprise, surprise, the Duke came in through one of the gates that was not monitored by the press, and he was there for, for several weeks. I mean, he answered the telephone to somebody while he was there. He was up and about, and he wasn't at all well. But on the last night of his life, he gave his nurses the slip and went along the corridor on his Zimmer frame, helped himself to a beer, and was found in the Oak Room, which was that room where the Queen did all the Zooms. And the next morning, he got up and I think he had breakfast, he had a bath, and he didn't feel well. So he lay down and he died rather suddenly. So yes, so the Queen, she said she was, this was quoted, she was furious that as so often in life he left without saying goodbye. But you had to know the ways of the Duke of Edinburgh, and once you knew his ways, that was fine. His cousin, Prince Pavlos of Greece, said to me, if Prince Philip said to you, "What the devil are you doing here?" that was his way of saying how extremely nice to see you.
Well, Hugo, thank you so much for joining us on the Royalist. You must get on. Hugo has a brilliant Instagram page, which I am a subscriber to, and he's very active in his posting. I'm extremely impressed. He's much better than me. So do make sure that you subscribe to that. And most importantly, in just a few days' time, his extraordinary book, published to mark the 100th anniversary of the birth of Queen Elizabeth II, A Personal History, will be published. So thank you so much, Hugo, for joining us. It's been wonderful to have you.
Tom, thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Very enjoyable to chat with you, and good luck with all you do.
Well, of course, it wouldn't be the Royalist without Royal Fashion with Plum Sykes. Plum, how are you?
Hi, darling. I'm fine.
Good.
How are you, sweetie?
I'm great. So this is a special pre-recorded segment about a new exhibition showcasing all of Queen Elizabeth's clothes that's being put on at Buckingham Palace, at the King's Mews at Buckingham Palace. It's a fantastic exhibition. It just opened last week, and me and Plum have been looking at all the pictures. But before we get into that, Plum spotted some really fantastic royal merch. Tell us about this wonderful mug, Plum.
Tom, every time we decide that we're going to talk about something newsy to do with the royal family, like this centenary thing, I go, but darling, there's breaking news on the porcelain, the fashion, or whatever. And last week, one of your lovely viewers said, "Where did Plum get her gold cup?" Right? So this antique gold cup is actually from eBay, but they're Royal Worcester. So for that lovely viewer, you want to get gold luster. But I then thought to myself, okay, you can't buy the gold luster new. Let's try and find something similar. And was just browsing, as one does on a Sunday night, deep dive into the royal collection. And lo and behold, they've brought out a tea tankard. Okay, this is the celebratory tea tankard for Queen Elizabeth, what would have been her 100th birthday this year. And it is absolutely gorgeous. And I love the idea that they've called it a tankard, because I love the idea that you're just drinking your Guinness out of this porcelain tankard, Tom. Isn't it hilarious?
It is fantastic, and it's almost large enough to satiate my desire for a large cup of tea in the morning.
Do you know what, Tom? I'm going to get one. I am. And they're £50. I don't think that's too much. I mean, it's expensive for a cup, but you're getting a tankard. It's a deal. It's a deal, Tom.
It's eye-wateringly expensive, and it is not a deal. It's a gigantic amount of money to spend on a mug.
Okay, well, you know what? We're going to agree to disagree on that, Tom. Like, we disagree on a lot of things to do with the royal family. Okay.
Let's get into this amazing exhibition. As I said, it's to celebrate the 100th birthday of Queen Elizabeth. So it seems only appropriate, Plum, to start with this beautiful little christening dress, which in itself is absolutely lovely. But I think what you're going to like even more is the note that goes with it that explains its provenance. So could you talk us a bit through this, the custom of the English upper classes of using the same christening dress for multiple generations of children? And as we can see on this note here, it specifies that it was
used by one of Queen Victoria's children in the first place. That's probably Edward VII. And then you can see it's actually 2 pages, this note, and it goes right through to 1956. Extraordinary little glimpse of social history of the British upper classes there, Plum. Just tell us a bit about christening dresses.
Well, isn't that incredible, Tom, that the family christening gown has gone back to Queen Victoria's children? That is just an incredible document, and it's so lovely to see that. Very traditional among the English to christen their children, B, when they get christened, and they might only be 6 months old at this point, to dress them in these incredibly elaborate pale cream or white lace and embroidered silk or cotton gowns. And these dresses have a skirt that is about 1 meter long. So the baby looks like this sort of angel, right, in the arms next to the crypt where they're getting christened. But what I really love is this handwritten note that says at the top, I think it says at the top, Tom, repaired in 1906. Sorry, repaired in 1966, I think it says at the top, which I think was after the christening of maybe Prince Andrew or one of the current royal family. Well, actually, he's not Prince Andrew now. Sorry, Tom. So 1964. Oh, okay. Lady Sarah Armstrong Jones wore it in 1964. So she is the daughter of Princess Margaret.
Yes. Well done on your royal genealogy there.
Thank you, Tom. And what I think is interesting is that this tradition of keep using the old stuff is carrying on now. We see Princess Catherine; she's constantly re-wearing, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the rewear tradition, which is very Queen Elizabeth, which we're going to see in this show. So let's move on, Tommy.
So one more from the childhood is this. We couldn't really let this one go, because obviously one of the rituals of being a little English girl is your christening, and then also you'll be asked to be a bridesmaid. And here is Princess Elizabeth in a bridesmaid's dress, and just rather charming. Amazing. I don't think we need to say too much about it. But let's look at one of the big
well, hang on, Tom.
Yeah.
Hang on, Tom. What I want to say about this is that it was made by Edward Molyneux, who was a French couturier. It's still in really great condition now. This was 1934. And it was actually Elizabeth's bridesmaid's dress, and it was handed down to Margaret. And I think that Margaret wore it at the wedding of, was it George V or Princess Mary, Queen Mary? I can't remember, but in the 1930s, she wore that as a bridesmaid.
Right. Beautiful. Lovely dress. Let's move on to one of the big blockbuster images that we all know of the Queen, which is Queen Elizabeth in this fantastic Norman Hartnell gown. And we'll go back to this image, but just to show you, this is the gown itself in the exhibition. And there's a nice detail of a clutch to go with it. But tell us a bit, obviously, this is the photo that we all know and love. So, tell us a bit about Norman Hartnell, obviously very famous for these extravagant, glamorous, aristocratic looks. But tell us, what was the relationship between him and the Queen?
So, well, first of all, Tom, let me say that this photograph was taken by Cecil Beaton, who was a very fashionable photographer at the time, but he was also a favourite photographer of the royals, and he documented them throughout their lives. And he was famous for these romantic images. And this is so Cecil Beaton, the way that she's sitting, the roses on the head, which is the hat. And she is about to go to the wedding of Princess Margaret, which was in 1960. And Norman Hartnell, who actually became Sir Norman Hartnell, was the favoured designer of the royal family. But interestingly, he had dressed the Queen, who became the Queen Mother. So Queen Elizabeth's mother, also Elizabeth, was dressed by Norman Hartnell. He dressed many, many members of the royal family from the late 1920s. Now, what I think is fascinating about Norman Hartnell is he was the child of a publican. His parents lived in Streatham running a pub. He went to Cambridge. He always loved fashion and did lots and lots of fashion designs for the Cambridge footlights. And while he was there, he decided he wanted to become a fashion designer. Where he had connected himself very, very well with a set of men who were all friends with the Debs of the time. And he started making clothes for the chic debutantes. He was not from that world, which is maybe why he was able to kind of embrace the fantasy of the princess, kings, queens, and dress them so beautifully. It was very romantic the way that he dressed them. And this tiny waist that you saw on the other photograph, it was rumoured that at the time, Princess Elizabeth had a waist of 23 inches, which is sort of Victorian dimensions. He was famous for the tiny waist and the huge ball skirt. Guess where he got that inspiration from, Tom?
You've got me.
Okay, Tom, I knew I would, because you know nothing about fashion and I know nothing about the royal family. We've been here before. He got the idea by looking at Queen Victoria's wedding dress, what she wore for parties. And he said to Elizabeth, why don't we go for the floor length gown? Because actually at that time, remember, we're talking 1960s, everyone else was in mini dresses. And he actually kind of brought back long gowns for parties single-handedly by dressing her in this for that wedding.
Right. Amazing.
I mean, you can't believe, looking at that it's 1960. It looks like the golden age of the movies of the 30s in Hollywood, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's an incredible image. One of the other big blockbuster images of the Queen that I think people will be familiar with is, of course, Wedding Day, marriage to Philip Mountbatten. And this photograph, there's a couple of different photographs, and it's very interesting because I was looking at some of the photos. The original photos that we used at the time, they're all very formally looking at the camera. But increasingly in recent years, I've noticed people have much more wanted to use this photograph, which shows them looking at each other. There's a little bit of tenderness. And of course, such an amazing love story between the Queen and Prince Philip, I suppose. So there is the wedding dress itself is obviously part of this exhibition, and I'm guessing that it's been pared down and stripped down because it would just be too big to fit in the King's Mews, wouldn't it? But
well, it's interesting, Tom. It's a lot of dress. Right? It's a lot of volume, it's a lot of skirt. I think the dress that you might be referring to that might have been pared down was her coronation robes, which really was so huge that Hartnell had a lot of difficulty making something that she could actually walk in that kind of satisfied all the rules. But this dress, which was also made by Hartnell and which is covered in the most beautiful embroidery, it's Duchess satin. It would be a very heavy dress. It's got the sweetheart neckline that the late Queen absolutely loved. But what was so interesting was that he also made, Hartnell, all of the bridesmaids' dresses. And it was, a set piece. It wasn't just her. It was all the bridesmaids. And it was an incredible show of style and chic. But wait for it, Tom. Are you ready? It wasn't overt fashion. It wasn't an overt fashion statement. So it was all about style. It was all about the royal family. But it wasn't going, this is Norman Hartnell or this is X designer. It was low key, royal, chic, but full of glamour.
So another fantastic Norman Hartnell gown that is included in this exhibition is this little dazzler, which Queen Elizabeth II wore to a state dinner with Dwight Eisenhower. And we can actually see the original picture of Queen Elizabeth with Dwight Eisenhower there. Absolutely beautiful picture of Queen Elizabeth II. Plum, talk us through this picture. It looks slightly different in this image. Can you just change it, can you?
Yeah, so actually what's so interesting, Tom, is that Hartnell would often alter and repair and remake these gowns for the royal family. During the war, there was rationing of clothing, of woolens, of linens, of silks and all the rest of it. So they couldn't have constant new clothes. They got into the habit of taking their dresses to him. He would remake them and change them so they could wear them again to a function without making a new dress. And I think actually this kind of concept of rationing has clearly continued. She must have worn it somewhere else potentially before, and then the neckline was changed to potentially look... She must have worn it there first, and then it was changed afterwards, presumably, to the more sweetheart neckline, and the other neckline covers the shoulders a bit more, which in royal circles, showing your shoulders is considered, or was considered at that time a little bit risque. But I think, Tom, that if you went to America as the Queen, you could show your arms and shoulders, and you could be, a little bit more brazen and sexy with Eisenhower than maybe you could with a British Prime Minister like Churchill. But I also want to say, Tom, that I've got to hand it to the Royal Collection, because the way they've presented this show is particularly exquisite. And it reminds me a little bit of the way that the Met presents some of their Costume Institute shows for the Met Gala, where they will put them in a room, in the surroundings. It's not in a glass box. It's not sort of far away. You can really feel the atmosphere just from that photograph, the beautiful rug, the palm trees at the back, which is such a Victorian kind of feature, the gold mirror. It's just exquisitely done. I can't wait to go and see it, actually, Tom.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One of the Queen's great sayings was that she had to be seen to be believed. And one of the things that helped her do that was her transparent clothing. This is one of my favourite pieces in the exhibition, because we all remember the Queen in her transparent Macintosh, which allowed her to be seen and thus believed. But tell us a bit about Hardy Amos. I always was told that the Queen said she liked Hardy Amos because his clothes wouldn't startle the horses. Is that true? Have you heard that?
Do you know what? I haven't heard that, but he, funnily enough, was a sort of rival British couturier at the same sort of era and time as Norman Hartnell, and they weren't mad about each other apparently, but she obviously wore lots of his clothes. He was very kind of 60s. I think the fact that he made a couture see-through Mac for her is very witty and very, very clever. And she did need to be seen to be believed. And you know what? A Burberry trench over that just wouldn't have cut it, Tom. Though she did like a Burberry trench. She did.
She did. And the Seen to be Believed also, of course, famously, as you will recall, Plum, extended to, I just look at that picture and I just feel so nostalgic for Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah, I know, because there's something so genuine about it, and there's no vanity there, is there? To carry the ugliest umbrella that you can possibly find when you're the most famous woman in the world, I think that shows some real class. And she's letting people see her, because she understood it wasn't about her. It was about these people had come to see her. They wanted to see her. So she was going to let people see her and not put a great big black umbrella like celebrities do. So you can't see any of them. It's adorable. And actually, it's a very, very British thing, this see-through umbrella, because it rains so much here. You can see out of it. Cover yourself sort of to there and see out of it. And I remember, Tom, I don't know if you've seen pictures of this, but I think that the Queen, when she's at places like Balmoral, and we'll get onto the Balmoral clothes in a minute, would wear a Mac with a clear hood as well. Do you remember that?
Yeah. She had a wide variety of see-through Macs.
Yeah. And the see-through Macs, what's so interesting about them, of course, she had them made by Hardy Amies. They were couture. They were to fit her. But of course, at the time, people would wear these very cheap kind of Macintoshes that you go and buy from a supermarket for a couple of quid. You put them over your clothes. It's a very kind of country thing to do. So she had the common touch, she really did.
She certainly did. Okay, well, let's look at some of those Balmoral clothes next. Okay, so now we're going to get into some of the Queen's famous country clothing style. Of course, the Queen would always spend a really extended summer holiday, 3, even 4 months up in Balmoral in Scotland, where she would be clad in thick tweeds and various rain repellent goods, including this rather wonderful Burberry riding cape. Why is a cape so useful? I suppose a cape's jolly useful if you're riding a horse, is it, Plum?
Well, I mean, isn't that divine? So the point about a riding cape, and Tom, as you know, I'm a big horse rider, so I'm very obsessed with riding clothes, is that you can put it on over a thick tweed hacking jacket, right? A riding Mac with sleeves and everything is much bulkier and more kind of uncomfortable. And what she did was, the Queen on her horse, she just walked around Balmoral on these kind of Highland horses. She wasn't going off cantering or galloping or, particularly when she was older, or show jumping or hunting. So she could have something very civilized, like this little riding cape, which I wish Burberry would bring it back. I think they sell millions of them as a fashion item. Don't you, Tom?
I do. And here's something that she could have put underneath it, which is a lovely
Yes.
kind of tweed riding jacket by Bernard Wetherell, I think, a very esteemed old British brand, Savile Row.
Yeah.
Would
So-
this be the kind of thing you'd wear under your riding cape?
Yeah. So we will have seen multiple pictures of the Queen wearing this it's actually a hacking jacket, Tom. So that means just for going hacking, going for a walk on your horse. Bernard Wetherell, probably the most famous Savile Row tailor for horse people. So he strictly really makes garments for riding, the most incredible jobbers, the most incredible handmade hunting shirts, if you can possibly imagine. And he was famous for these jackets. And what I love about this, the tiny nipped-in waist, the very long skirt, which would have kind of covered your bum while you're riding. It looks very, very elegant. And it's just so iconic. And I think that was made in the 1950s, 1960s, but it looks as current today as ever because those clothes are eternal. They don't change, Tom.
Absolutely. And another one that you'd say is a pretty durable look would be this fella.
I love it, Tom. So I think this is my favourite look probably from the whole show, actually. This was Balmoral tartan, kilt, it was called, but really it's a beautiful pleated skirt, and a Harris tweed jacket. This was made for the Queen by Norman Hartnell, and it was made in the 1950s. And you can see it's got the most beautiful line. Again, you could wear this today, and it's the kind of look that you can wear that out in the country with your wellies. You can go for a walk, but equally you can go and sit down at Christmas lunch in it, which is kind of what I imagine the Queen doing. I think it's so chic. She would have worn it with her little headscarf, with probably a diamond brooch. What I think was so interesting about Hartnell at this time was he was one of the only couturiers who was working in kind of tweeds and wools. And this was partly because his sister Phyllis, who ran his business for him, he wasn't a very good businessman, said, listen, Norman, enough with the party dresses, enough with the cocktail dresses, enough with the ball gowns. You've got to make these women clothes they can wear in the daytime. So he started making daytime looks for the royal family and for society women. And what I think is so interesting, and you can see it from looking at this, is that both Coco Chanel and Christian Dior, those two famous designers who were obviously very, very influential at the time, they looked at what Norman Hartnell, was doing in wool and tweed for the royal family, and they were very inspired by it. And as you probably know, Tom, Coco Chanel, no, you won't know because you don't know anything about fashion. I keep forgetting this. But Coco Chanel worked a lot in wool. She worked a lot in tweed. She got a lot of it sourced from England. This Harris tweed that he was using for this jacket, probably Coco Chanel would have used it for her designs too. Isn't that amazing?
Right. Yeah, very cool, very cool. And of course, it wouldn't be a show about Queen Elizabeth without a handbag.
So
I will tell you something about the Queen's handbags, first of all, which is that when the Queen was at a garden party or a big event or whatever, if she moved her handbag from that side to that side, that was a cue to the aide to come over and go, oh, madam, we need to move you on to that. It was her way to escape from the person that she was talking to.
That's so interesting. So obviously, you know, the Queen's handbag law and the kind of language that the handbag telegraphed is kind of legendary. The other thing I heard, Tom, was that if she took the handbag and put it on the table in front of her, that meant meeting over. Get me out of here, guys.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I have to say my favourite bit was probably chatting to my darling sister about 100 years of the Queen's fashion. But what were your favourite bits? Let me know in the comments below. As always, a massive thank you to my guests, Paula Froelich, Plum Sykes and Hugo Vickers. We all have Substacks in social media accounts. You can find those in the links below. It only remains for me to issue a huge thank you to our producers, Rachel Passer, Devon Rogerino, aided this week by Ben. Thanks very much, everybody, and we'll see you next week.